They never expected you to succeed. They banked on your uncertainty, anxiety, and reluctance. They whispered their stories into the ears of everyone around you. They shape perceptions, distort realities, and do all in their power to make you doubt your own reality. They wanted you to be weak. They wanted you to remain hesitant because they knew the instant you recognized yourself for who you really are, the game would be over. But here you are, unshaken, untouchable. No amount of force, trickery, or carefully constructed illusion has been sufficient to shatter what was always intended to last. Every effort to manipulate you, alter your tale, or dictate your fate has failed spectacularly. They've hurled their worst at you, yet you stay stronger, smarter, and divinely linked. The same thing they attempted to remove has become difficult to ignore. And that scares them, because you were not designed to fit in. You were never intended to bow, to follow, to be bound by their regulations. You were put in this position to cause trouble, to demolish, to awaken, and the reality is, they fear you because they understand who you are. You are the power that dispels illusions. You are the light that reveals their shadows. You are the one thing they cannot silence. And no matter how much they attempt to change your destiny, what is written in the stars cannot be undone. Now, watch them panic. They invaded the areas where your voice formerly reverberated freely, causing distortions in the fabric of reality. Every encounter presented a potential for misinformation. Each statement is a determined attempt to undermine assurance. They deliberately changed the story, confounding views. Until shadows became monsters and whispers became roars, their goal was obvious. Fractured connections. Dismantle peace and sow the seeds of conflict so deeply that truth becomes unrecognizable. They depended on invisible fissures, expecting ambiguity to do the job for them. For a while, it seemed as if their strategy had taken root. Familiar faces felt foreign words, carried an unusual weight, and the unsaid tension stretched between moments like a thread about to break. They delighted at that moment, feeling they had one. They sat in calm pride, certain that what had been skillfully constructed would eventually shatter under the weight of lies. However, they made an error in their calculations. Is it true that they failed to comprehend this? Bonds are not broken by distortion. They are honed by it. What was supposed to weaken only got stronger, and the distance they pushed became the one thing that revealed reality. The effort to detach serves only to strengthen. For when the veil of deception lasts too long, it causes the light to burn more brightly. The much-anticipated collapse they despised never arrived. Instead, the illusion shattered the threads they had painstakingly plucked, slipping from their grip. And the only thing that remained standing was the reality that they wanted to conceal. Now realization dawns. The illusion of control fades, showing how impotent they have always been. The power they once possessed was an illusion that vanished the instant clarity appeared. The weight of their own lie bears down on them, greater than any strategy they had conceived. Their manipulation tactics were never about power, but about eliciting a response. Is there any reaction? They thrived on provocation, hoping to see rage, pain, or submission. But quiet was their undoing. The lack of turmoil denied them the gratification they sought, and without a reaction to feed their fire, they are left with just the sour taste of their own irrelevance. No weapon created against you shall succeed, and every mouth spoken against you in judgment will be condemned. Isaiah 5417. They placed their traps with precision, like a hunter laying snares in the dark, certain that they could lure you down into the hole they created. But they never realized that you were never strolling alone. They saw flesh. They noticed the circumstances. They perceived an illusion of control. But they didn't see the hand that has been protecting you from the beginning. They assumed they could shake your foundation. But you were created on rock rather than sand. Every storm they unleashed, every wave they created, none of it could break something that was never theirs. They studied every flaw, seeking for the ideal entrance point. They observed, researched, and waited. You would hesitate for a minute, the moment your soul buckled beneath the weight of their games. They were certain that if they pressed hard enough, you would break. But rather of crumbling, you did something unexpected. You stood still. You didn't pursue. You didn't explain. You did not struggle for a seat at a table that was never intended to accommodate you. And in that quiet, their delusion crumbled. Because the fact is that they never wielded actual authority. They weren't gigantic. They looked like mountains, but were really shadows. Their control was never based on strength. It was all about the enthusiasm you provided them. They based their universe on your response, feeding off your fury, depending on your suffering. However, when you refused to participate, when you diverted your attention, they wilted because they were unable to rely on their own resources. They were feeding off of yours. See? The opponent consistently underestimates the power of quiet. They anticipate noise. They anticipate turmoil. They expect revenge. They don't know what to do with a fighter who battles without using a weapon. They cannot understand the power of someone who recognizes their value and does not beg, who doesn't plead, who doesn't need to prove themselves to those who will never understand them. That level of power, it is divine. It was picked. It cannot be affected by manipulation, persuaded by trickery, or taken by those who are not supposed to possess it. So, now watch them scurry. Keep an eye on them as they experiment with new techniques. Observe how they change their approach. Watch them try to get you back into their web because they can't operate without your response. But it's too late. They've already lost, and they know it. You do not need to fight a war that has already been won. You don't have to answer to those who aren't supposed to walk beside you. You do not need to prove what is already established. Stand steady and let them see what heavenly protection looks like. Confusion first obscured their assurance. They waited for revenge, certain that quiet meant strategy. Surely, the storm was only gaining power before the final explosion. But as the days passed without reprisal, the weight of uncertainty pushed down on them. That quiet did not constitute capitulation. It was a mirror that forced them to see their own lie without distractions. They spiraled, racing for leverage, inventing new crises out of thin air, issuing apologies loaded with ulterior intentions, and manipulating tales to elicit even the slightest response. But nothing landed. Every frantic endeavor ended in the abyss, strangled by an emptiness they couldn't penetrate. And it caused them to unravel. The more they pushed, the more they lost control, slipping into a spiral of frustration, caught in a game where they were the only ones left to play. For a while, they flourished on the art of distortion, creating tales that obscured truth. Misdirection became their currency, as did confusion, their finest weapon. They created a world of changing illusions, luring individuals into a meticulously staged deception in which trust was weak and uncertainty prevailed. It worked, at least for a while. The murmurs spread, the gap expanded, and the divide seemed irreparable. However, illusions are ephemeral and falsehoods inevitably crumble beneath the weight of reality. The farther they delved into their narrative, the more discrepancies revealed. Patterns appeared. Discrepancies increased. The flaws in their carefully built veneers started to spread. The mask, once flawless, began to unravel, and the very person they tried to dominate ultimately realized the truth, not via confrontation, but through the gradual, unavoidable decay of lying itself. There is nothing concealed that will not be revealed. There is no secret that will remain hidden. Luke 8:17. The truth has a way of exposing itself. Cracks may be painted over regardless of their depth. However, if the foundation is constructed on falsehood, it will eventually disintegrate. You may lower the lights, but this simply makes the blackness more visible when morning finally breaks. And that's exactly what occurred here. At first, it was only a flicker, a whisper in the back of the mind to faint, clutch, or be subtle, to name a few moments that didn't seem right. A narrative with gaps too large to bridge. However, the sense of discomfort persisted. It remained like a splinter under the flesh, small, yet tough to miss. And as time went, it grew more difficult to push away. The truth wasn't just knocking. It was breaking down the door. What was once unquestionable now became suspicious. A misplaced word here, a strange contradiction there, an unusual change in conduct. The design seemed like ink seeping through cloth. It's difficult to conceal or wash away. What had previously seemed secure and protective now seemed to be a disguised jail. The walls were not meant to provide shelter. They were designed to hold the words uttered to guide. They were instructed to control. And as knowledge dawned, it struck like a bolt of lightning through the shroud of falsehood. They saw every falsehood they had accepted as true, every misdirection they had ignored, every warning had been muted, because believing the illusion was simpler than confronting the tempest of reality. And now, standing amid the ruins of what they once believed, they see only the imminent loss of something valuable. The deceit almost snatched what was supposed to be safeguarded, the consequences of their own mistaken faith. However, their current sorrow is not for what they have lost. It is for any occasion. They disregarded the indications, handing up power to someone who never deserved it. See, the adversary does not always seem as a destroyer. They may arrive as guides. They may wear a friend's face. They may use things that seem wise, but they are interwoven with shackles that are designed to tie rather than release. But here's the deal. You can't take the truth back after you've seen it. Once removed, the blindfold cannot be reapplied. And there is where actual power resides. They now have an option. They are now at a crossroads between their past and their future. The illusion is gone. The deception has collapsed. The only remaining issue is what they will do with what they now know. This was never about keeping people imprisoned. It was never about keeping them little. This was about waking people up, since the truth was never forgotten. It was waiting for them to be ready, for them to delve deeper rather than just on the surface. And now that they've seen it, there is no turning back. But consciousness alters everything. Once detected, dishonesty is irreversible. The illusionist feels their grasp weakening. No more diversions or distractions. There will be no more methods to hide the truth. What they battled so hard to control is now out of their grasp, sliding through their fingers like water. And for those who have looked beyond the surface, there is no going back. Not everyone will understand, and not everyone is expected to. This message is not intended for the masses. It's for those who have always felt different, for those who refuse to comply. Those who could never be subdued by expectation were never intended to be average. They don't follow routes created by others. They are disruptive. They reveal. They dispel illusions. While the rest of the world goes in circles, they forge their own path, if necessary. Not for approval or acceptance, but because they were never supposed to be anything less. When the storm has passed, the wicked are gone. However, the virtuous will always remain steadfast. Proverbs 10:25. They built their home on sinking sand, believing the seas would never rise. They felt the storm would never arrive. They believed they could withstand the storm, that their foundation of lies, fraud, and control would be sturdy. However, as the waves arrive and the flood levels rise, the home of falsehood will inevitably fall. It is not a question of if, it's a question of when. For a time, they strutted through life as if they were unbeatable. Every move was premeditated, and every movement was intended to influence the board in their advantage. They talked with confidence and arrogance, creating illusions so elaborate that they began to believe them themselves. They weren't just playing the game. They considered themselves the masters of it. They transformed rumors into weapons, pitting individuals against one another like chess pieces, and believing themselves that they were always one step ahead. A deceit resembles a house of mirrors. It only works when no one looks too carefully. And now the fissures are visible. The walls are bending. The foundation is eroding. The same traps they created for others are now closing around them. The same games they enjoyed are disintegrating in their hands. Every lie they told, every secret they kept, and every twisted story they made up is finally coming to light, piece by piece and brick by brick. At first, they disregarded it. Just a slight fracture, a minor shift, and a little instability in their neatly crafted world. But the fractures became wider. People began to notice. Stories ceased synchronizing the whispers they employed as weapons, which turned against them. And now the air is heavy from their own exposure. They struggled to keep it together, looking for fresh falsehoods, diversions, and ways to restore control. But it is too late. The threads break, the web collapses, and they are imprisoned in the mayhem they caused. This is what happens when you base your empire on falsehood. This is what happens when you believe in your own delusions. It feels substantial for a while. It gives you a sense of power. Consider control, until the moment truth begins to shake the earth underneath you. And when that time arrives, reality pushes back. There is nowhere to flee. Because when God removes his hand, lifts the protective barrier, and turns on the light, there is no more hiding. No amount of trickery will conceal what has already been disclosed. No amount of damage control can reverse what has already happened. The truth has come out, and they cannot stop it now. They believed they could bend the world to their will. They believed they could change destiny. However, they failed to see that destiny does not yield to trickery. And they stand among the rubble of their own creation, watching the empire they made crumble to dust. They just have one thing left to do: face what they never imagined would happen. The storm has come, and the home they erected is already crumbling slowly. The fractures expanded. What had previously looked unshakable now shook under its own weight. The differences were first dismissed as trivial misunderstandings or small mistakes. But then the discrepancies grew. The parts no longer fit together, and the patterns, which were before buried in plain sight, were hard to overlook. The carefully crafted veneer started to disintegrate, thread by thread. Exposing the frail framework underneath, the questions became louder. The illusions fell apart, and the person they had worked so hard to mislead began to see through the layers of distortion. Desperation had replaced confidence. Their typical strategies, which had previously smoothly twisted reality in their favor, started to weaken. Where there was once complete faith, skepticism had replaced manipulation, which had previously flourished. Resistance had taken root. They struggled against the inevitable, racing for control with false regret, orchestrated pity, and meaningless gestures designed to entice their victim back into obedience. But the enchantment was shattered. The strings broke. The shadows had lifted, and the one they wanted to contain was already beyond their grasp. The more they felt the grasp loosening, the more reckless they grew. Panic descended like a roaring tempest, forcing them into more desperate moves. They tried everything: fabricated crises, coerced confessions, and guilt. But each motion merely revealed them more. Their once seamless influence suddenly appeared awkward, apparent, and useless. The weight of their own lie pressed down on them, stifling the very control they had battled so hard to keep. They thought they could change reality itself, but truth slipped through their fingers like sand. And as they stood amid their own ruins, it became plain. Nothing they did could restore what had already been gone. The person they were attempting to keep hostage was no longer shackled. Not through falsehoods, not through fear, not by previously unbreakable illusions. The shackles had snapped. They took with them any remaining grip. They mistaken stillness for submission, absence for weakness, and distance for defeat. They failed to comprehend, however, that disagreement does not damage meaningful ties. They are honed by it. Every effort to break what was designed to last merely reinforced its foundation. The fire intended to destroy became the power that revealed the truth. Now, standing in the ashes of their failed plans, they are left with only the unsettling reality that they were never in control. The meddling, sabotage, and endless games had all been in vain. What they intended to undermine had merely been strengthened. The more they struggled against it, the more obvious its presence became. They must now be vigilant. Watch as the exact thing they attempted to obliterate remains unshaken. While they are left to confront the truth of their own demise, various plans form in a person's heart. However, the Lord's purpose wins. Proverbs 19:21. They believed they could change what was already written in the skies. They felt that their words, Manipulations and deceptions could counteract what had already been put in motion before they arrived. They mistaken their influence for authorship. Assuming they had power over the participants, they could alter the tale. However, destiny is not restricted by falsehood. Whatever is written will come to pass, and no amount of tampering can change what has already been announced. They devised their methods as a weaver would a tapestry, thread by thread. They were not sure that if they tugged the appropriate threads, they could change the result. They talked with conviction, behaved confidently, and moved as if they had control over something that was never theirs. But now, as the whole fabric of their schemes unravels before them, they find themselves standing in the debris of their own construction. See, borrowed power is not the same as own power. They never had actual strength. They merely had responses. Their control was an illusion maintained by the energy they extracted from others, their anxiety, mistrust, and readiness to participate. They lived on strife, division, and confusion, then pretended to provide a solution. But when the energy was taken off, the selected ones ceased fueling the flames. Their whole kingdom crumbled to rubble, and now they're seeing something they said they could eradicate stand higher than ever as the one they attempted to diminish rises unaffected. Watching the route they attempted to obstruct became further evident. Everything they've labored for, every whispered falsehood, every twisted truth, and every planned plot has been for naught. The foundation they believed was so strong was nothing but sand seeping through their fingers. The most upsetting aspect for them was not that they had lost control. It's not even as if their manipulation failed. The truth is that none of it ever mattered. None of their efforts changed the result. None of their actions altered what had already been written. They were never the guardians of destiny, nor the engineers of divine alignment. They felt they have power. They believed they had influence. They believed they had control. However, they were never in control. If your heart is overflowing with God's blessings, let that love radiate. Click the super thank you button and donate $20 or more to sow seeds of faith that will change countless lives. Your giving exemplifies His richness. Be a channel for His grace and watch His kingdom grow through you. When desperation takes over, it does not whisper. It screams. Losing control does not result in tranquility. Surrender. It ignites. Frantic efforts to recapture what has already gone. The final resort is usually the most chaotic, the most irresponsible, a contrived crisis, an urgent plea, an unexpected tragedy. Whatever it takes to get their target back in, they will play the victim, portraying themselves as the one in need of rescue, pulling on emotions strategically to create another snare. And if it fails, they turn, making charges, turning truth into weapons, setting fire to everything that may still raise doubts. If manipulation fails to tether them, then dread must exist. If guilt isn't enough to keep them in check, fury will. When everything else fails, they turn to the last act. They pretended to be sorry. Confessions without substance. Promises of transformation, wrapped in the same old illusion. They will say what has to be said, do what has to be done, creating one last illusion to postpone the inevitable. But it will not work. Not this time. Because, once lifted, the curtain cannot be restored. The one they wanted to control now sees with perfect clarity. No apologies can repair what was intentionally damaged. No confession can erase the extent of their lie. The last act has started, but the audience is no longer engaged. The manipulator stands alone, acting out a script that no one believes, imprisoned in a performance that no longer has power. And they come to terms with the fact that they never actually had power and that their impact was transitory. The reality of their own demise eventually sinks in. Allow them to clutch at straws. Allow them to make their final desperate moves. Allow them to use up all of their remaining tricks. It will not affect what is to come. They were never supposed to be a part of the ultimate conclusion, no matter how many hurdles they set in their path or how hard they attempt to twist destiny. They were nothing but a distraction, a momentary interruption on a voyage much grander than their plans. Now that the illusions have been destroyed, their effect has vanished. But the fundamental issue no longer concerns them. What will happen now that the deceit has been exposed? Because it was never simply about exposing the person who attempted to lie. It was about exposing the whole truth, not just their falsehoods, but also those who let themselves be misled. Perhaps they were too eager to listen, too easily convinced, and too blind to see beyond the fabrications when it counted the most. Perhaps it was never about regaining something lost, but rather about recognizing what was worth retaining in the first place. Because even the most powerful relationships and deepest friendships may be questioned. And today, standing at this crossroads, the option is obvious. Do you reconstruct what formerly existed? Or do you stride ahead certain that your strength was never dependent on anybody else? Because you were already entire before deceit and interference occurred, and you continue to be whole. No matter what route you select, they based their identity on the assumption that they had triumphed, that their deceit was immaculate, their control absolute, and their plots unstoppable. They relished in the illusion of triumph. They were certain they had altered the result to fit their needs. But now, standing amid the ruins of their own devastation, they have nothing. They threw all of their energy into pulling things apart. Every deliberate effort, every attempt to influence the unavoidable. Nothing amounted to anything. The power they believed they had was an illusion that dissipated as soon as the reality was revealed. They were never the creators of this narrative. We are never in control of our own fate. They thought they were untouchable. However, they are now the ones who have been left empty-handed. And when you walk away stronger than ever, unfazed by their intervention, the fact they refuse to recognize becomes obvious. They only fully ruin themselves.